I would like to start by saying that because today we're going to be talking about chapters 7 and 8. These are chapters that deal with questions related to death, dying, and pain. And also they gesture towards questions of mental illness and may be dealing with questions related to suicide. I will ask those who are not in a space right now to be approaching these issues to either not attend this session, or to be more careful in relationship to their bus, and to reach out to us if necessary at the end of the session. So with this out there, I think I'm going to start by reminding everybody that the work that I do is not work that is done individually. I would like to honor those who work with me by saying that this work is situated within the context of the Gesturing Towards Decolonial Futures Arts Research Collective, and that I'm extremely grateful for having everybody in my life. And again, the invitation for you today is to be able to observe your bus, create the psychoanalytic distance, check what your passengers are saying, what they're feeling, how they are, what they're doing, how what the weather of the bus is like, where the bus is going, if it's going a straight line, round a roundabout, what the tires and brakes and fuel are looking like. And just to pay attention to what responses you're observing, especially because the topics today are topics related to our metabolic entanglement and our existence together. So chapter 7 of Hospicing Modernity was about living and dying well. And the chapter centers around the story of the Four Mountains, which was a collaboration with Cree elder John Cryer. So there are many things we can say about the story. I'm not going to retell the story. I'm just going to talk about it in a kind of as an overview. So this is a story about four mountains. There's a baby mountain, warrior mountain, a provider mountain or hunter mountain, and an elder mountain at the back. And it's a very rich story. This is not the kind of story that is the story that is passed in John's indigenous community from generations, right? Through the generations. This is a story that he came up with related to how he translated the stories that were passed down into something that could make sense in helping people that he was working with. And John Cryer works in prisons and with people recovering from substance use. So the story, this is not one of those stories that we hear from the communities that shouldn't be shared. It's a story that came as a pedagogical offering from John, and we worked on it together to see how it could travel to other communities. And John was extremely generous in requesting also this collaboration and this traveling with the story. But I think one of the things that the story really emphasizes is that modernity generally traps us into the warrior mountain, into what in the story would be equivalent to the teenage mountain. And modernity does that by elevating youth, by vilifying to a certain extent aging, and by creating a specific story of maturity related to accumulation of wealth that is detrimental to the planet and into our own health. So the story of modernity is a story of self-infantilization and immaturity. So the model of aging that we have within modernity traps us in a state where we may be refusing to grow up, and we do not want the responsibilities involved in growing up. So the story was also a source of inspiration for other work of the collective that then took the metaphor and into a different space. And here I would like to emphasize the work of Jocelyn Yesha, Stephen Pernot, and Mo Drescher, who created a series of cartographies of aging through their work in the Social Innovation Aging Lab of the government of Nova Scotia. So they've been working with us in terms of the methodology of creating cartographies that could be useful to spark conversations about aging, not aging as in becoming senior within modernity, but aging as the process that we all go through from the moment that we are born. And with the direction that is also present in John Cryer's For Mountain story, the direction that is the invitation for education to be about preparing us to become good elders and ancestors for all relations. So with that invitation, certain other cartographies were created that could offer a critique of how modernity sees aging and an invitation to see it differently. So the first frame of their cartography, for example, is about this mountain, modernity offering us a mountain, but it's a mountain of entitlement, with people on one side of the mountain doing the climbing in a very competitive way, the other people on the other side doing the climbing in a more cooperative way, but everybody wanting the same thing at the top, which is safety, certainty, control, prosperity, as in accumulation of capital and stability. The second frame of the same cartography shows how the mountain of entitlement is built upon expropriation, exploitation, destitution, dispossession, and genocide, and how people then relate to these costs or how the costs of this mountain is invisibilized within the stories of modernity. And then you have in this frame as well, some people at the bottom there saying we have already sorted it because we're not interested in the mountain, but who then deny their own complicity also in what makes the mountain viable. So you have people there saying, I stopped eating meat, or I donate to the cause, or we're all one, without realizing that there are cracks on those grounds where you can also find the invisibilized costs of these other forms of entitlement. So I will, in the email that I sent at the end of the week to everybody with this recording, I will also include the link to these cartographies and the audio that goes with them, where Jocelyn, Stephen, and Mo are explaining what they were thinking about these and other frames. So please have a look at that, because I think it's extremely interesting. And this is a project that is continuing also with another member of the collective, Kesha Hanna-Q, who has just published a post on our website about eldering, an invitation to eldering. And he did that as he turned 60. So it wasn't a collective exercise, but also a birthday celebration for him to create a long text in response to the question, what is coming from a younger person in the collective, saying, what is there to look forward to after 40? And so Cash at 60 is reflecting on 35 things that he thinks are worth looking forward to after 40. And also there's an exercise at the end that invites you to engage with your younger and older selves through a series of questions that I think is extremely interesting. But I selected an excerpt from the text from Cash to share with you today, and I'll be quoting Cash here. What I've learned so far, I just turned 60, is that eldering is the deepening and expansion of holistic capacities, while one's physical capacities decline and the time to exit the physical body draws nearer. To date, I have identified 4 of these holistic capacities, which include, number 1, the capacity to be present to the complex reality of things, the beautiful, the ugly, the good, the bad, the broken, and the messed up within and around us, as opposed to escaping what is difficult, painful, or disgusting, and or being attached to idealized and more comfortable versions of reality and of ourselves. 2 is the capacity to enact visceral responsibility, to face responsibilities without excuse, which means doing what is needed at the time, even when it goes against one's self-interest, as opposed to responsibility being an intellectual choice or a matter of convenience. 3 is the capacity to put oneself in service while divesting from the desire to be remembered for that service, as opposed to transactional altruism, which is often based on the desire to leave a legacy that monumentalizes one's life or one's name. And 4 is the capacity to offer a compass that can help people navigate towards collective and metabolic health and well-being without imprinting one's own projections onto someone else's path. So this means respecting the principle of non-interference on one's path and allowing people to make their own mistakes, while honoring the responsibility to guide people away from mistakes already made and ditches already known. So I invite you to look at Cash's text towards Eldring, where he expands on this and includes the 35 things we need to look forward to when we're after 40. He also introduces the concept. We have been using the invitation to grow up as a phrase in the collective, but from that exercise on, I think Cash suggested that a better phrase would be to grow down rather than to grow up. And we're exploring that. In some contexts, it is a better phrase. In other contexts, it doesn't work as well. But we're looking at that. Now, in terms of chapter 8, returning home, I have written a text about that I would like to read today and share with you. So I will stop the Prezi and enable the sharing of my screen. It's here. So I'm going to read from here. So chapter 8 was the chapter where both physical and psychological pain showed up as teachers in ways that made me naked and vulnerable. Too many stories were activated and many were edited out, especially those that exposed other members of my family without their consent. I come from a neuroatypical family where we have struggled together with responses that are considered dysfunctional within modernity, including responses that really added to the racial, colonial, and gendered violence of modernity itself. So that means that as a young kid, I had to learn quickly to read the room, not because I was interested in what other people were doing, but because I had to protect my safety. So the story that is mine to tell relates to a familiar ditch that my bus can easily fall in, especially when certain passengers spin and hijack the bus. With time, I have learned techniques to spot the spinners early and prevent a full fall in the ditch before it happens. But sometimes they take the bus driver by surprise. Those around me have had to learn this dynamic on my bus so that they know what to do and how to help. I also had to learn how to ask for help. Today, another difficult story came up and asked to be told. I was not prepared for that. No. I'm not sure why it did that, but I will trust that it needs to be out there, regardless of the risks. I'll share with you a story about the last time my bus was on the brink of a dangerous ditch, which happened just over 2 months ago during the holiday season. So SAD, what modernity calls seasonal affective disorder, or what I call the sadness, anger, and distrust ditch, is a disease that feeds the spinners on my bus. I'm not sure if it is the pandemic, but I see it getting stronger in its grip, in myself and others every year. I'm quite privileged. I have a secure job that enables me to do the work I want to do and support those who need my support. I live in a collective house surrounded by people I love. I have unrestricted access to both Western and Indigenous medicines. I have elders praying for my health and well-being. I have the knowledge and the training to identify the symptoms and to do something about it. And yet it gets me every year. The Christmas spirit, coupled with traumatic stories of this overjoyed season around other people in my family with SAD, and the lack of light only makes it worse. At the beginning of last December, I thought I was holding it together pretty well. I felt exhausted and a bit down, but nothing major. I was holding out to the idea that this trip to Brazil we had planned for January could help me to avoid the spinners this winter. When the trip got canceled due to Omicron, I heard a bus passenger spinner laughing. Anger got stacked upon sadness, which is the second stage of the disease. The world became way more irritating. The focus turned to the shadows of and in everything. First, I turned on my body, and I was going down this rabbit hole. I found help and support to stop the toxic progression in that direction. And thank you to those who helped me with that. But this gave a false impression that I was fine, and I let my guard down. I saw it building up on the days before Christmas. I tried to repress it, to go along and get along. And then there was a spark and it exploded in the afternoon of the Christmas Eve, precisely when I was trying to make it not ruin everything. For a few hours, I saw my distrust in the metabolic intelligence in full bloom. I saw my ego stomping its feet to have the world as I wanted it to be, rather than facing what was presenting itself before me. I played the record of narratives of angels and demons, where I wanted songs sung in praise of those and what I romanticized and idealized, and I wanted punishment for those I vilified and pathologized. I made self-righteous work plans to tell the world the truth about its toxicity and expose those who let it fester. I also planned to eliminate from my life anything and anyone who did not contribute to the elevation of my ego or validate its entitlement for choice, comfort, certainty, control, and convenience. And even as I saw the trick of it all with the corner of my eye, I had no chance of stopping it on its tracks. The spinner used my glance over its own deceit to turn my distrust towards the source. As soon as I realized that my ego was spinning and tripping, the last weapon of SAD was to activate and amplify resentment towards being alive, towards the whole metabolic shebang and its brutality. That is when SAD hits me the hardest. The sense of entanglement is actually amplified. So it's amplified in relationship to the shit. And I feel horrendous pain. It feels like the pain of everything, every injustice, every sorrow, every atrocity. And at the same time that I feel the oneness with the universe, including the pain itself, I feel abhorred and disgusted towards whoever or whatever created it. This is a familiar ditch, and life is not precious in that ditch. The whole thing feels like an extremely cruel and degrading joke. In that hole, for me, the only thing that can show the universe a finger, be it a god, a goddess, or a higher self, is to put an end to the shit show. That is when the entitlement to end my own life is felt the strongest. The compelling invitation is to let this entitlement overtake you. You don't have to do anything really, just surrender. And you surrender to the arrogance of it. You can also run away from it and wait for it to catch up with you when you feel exhausted, when the spinner is stronger with the opportunity for physical exercise you have provided. As I contemplated the invitation, I remembered every time I saw the spinner in my family over the years. I remember that as a contrary teacher, or as a trickster, if you will, it won't give up until it teaches its lesson, until someone in the family finds the beginning of an antidote and others help to refine it. I pondered what would happen if this antidote was not found, how the weight of that responsibility would have to be passed down to the next generations in my family. I thought about everything I had tried before that had not worked, and I felt exhausted. I thought about running to buy me some time, but I knew that the more I run and repress as I get older, the less stamina I have to resist its advances. I had to outsmart it. I honestly did not think I could. that asshole is skinny and strong. To add to the difficulty, by this time, I had locked myself in a room and I had someone trying to talk to me at the door, asking to come in. He had been reckless and outright stupid in sparking the explosion. I was mad at him. There was zero chance I could forgive him immediately. And at the door, he was saying that the explosion happened for a reason, which infuriated me even more. How dare he weaponize the fate narrative to justify betrayal? In the midst of all this, I did something that I had not tried before. I looked the spinner in the eye, something I was not expecting to happen. That gave me less than a second to conjure a counterspell narrative to buy some more time in that standoff. You are a family curse, I said, that needs to be turned into a blessing. I don't know how to do that, I thought to myself, but I remembered that I don't have to know to start the process. I opened the door. I regained strength. I went downstairs and summoned my family. I asked them for help. We created a ritual that could send the signal that enough was enough. We used salt, we burned the chili pepper, and we made an offering. We told the trickster teacher that we see its trickery, that it can't live with us anymore in that way. We promised to learn to integrate its lessons, even if it was not clear how that exactly would happen. And luckily, I was only on the brink of the ditch for a few hours, but we will need to repeat the ritual every year. After that, we started going on long walks in the forest again, always on the same tracks, so that the trees know our scent and can be asked to protect us from our own spinners. The invitation today for you in the breakout rooms is to check your bus, and especially those passengers that are trying to hide from you. And there will be 3 questions. One question is about how passengers in your bus relate to death and dying. The second one is how passengers in your bus relate to aging and the invitation of eldering. And the third one is about your spinners. So what do you think your spinners are up to? And have you managed to name both the spinners and the ditches where your bus usually falls into? I have to acknowledge that my bus is a bit unsettled. I don't think spinners like when we talk about them. So I have to be extra careful as I hold space for my bus right now. And I think that's probably why I also finished a little bit earlier, because I needed some time just to hold space and see what they're up to. But I think I'm okay to do the questions and answers now. So I'll start with Ella's question about the third mountain. As we grow and integrate the gifts of this work, how do we know when to begin to offer gifts and medicines to others? We just start. We do. We learn by doing. There's not going to be a formula, but there are things here that can help. For example, having conversations with people with similar gifts to yours who have done some of the cooking of these medicines and who can give you some idea of how to offer it in a good way too, because it's not just the gift, it's the offering that is important, right? And when, how much, for what. These are things that we only learn by doing, but that are super important as we start to climb that mountain. And without that learning, you can't integrate your gifts with the gifts of others. And I think another thing that is important about the gifts too is that it does the giving does the desire to give doesn't take precedence over the need for the gift too, because sometimes you just feel that you need to give because you're feeling worthless and you need just the validation that there's a purpose or there is a place for your gift, and that's not a good way of offering the gift, because then it is about you, right? About the offering. It needs to be about, for the gift to be honored, it needs to be about the offering and the match between what you bring and what is needed needs to be there. So thinking about whether you are the right messenger, whether the gift contains the right message in the right moment, with the right mood. All of this are much more important than the gift itself, and the medicine that is in there that you would have to cook. And being in contact with other people who have similar gifts, they have the same kind of kitchen for cooking those gifts, makes it very makes it easier, basically. You're to develop a relationship with your gift that is not a relationship of projection. It's a relationship that honors the movement of the gift, not just the gift on its own. But yes, it is by doing. There's no other way. There's not going to be a book telling you how to do this, not Hospicing Modernity, not any other book. But we can learn from others, from the stories of others, how they have cooked their medicines, and learn in a meta way what we can do differently, and also the mistakes already made, so that we don't make the same mistakes. So, second question, Oceana. How do people of the African diaspora cultivate a sense of home or place on the lands to which their kidnapped ancestors were brought to against their will? So many layers to this question, and so many layers to the answers as well. And some of the layers of the answer or the response are incomplete. We're still figuring this out. Other layers are uncomfortable. So in relationship, for example, to contexts where this diaspora is brought to a place of already a colonial occupation, that question becomes more difficult to answer, because it adds to other layers of violence that are already there, that we then become both complicit in, and also take part in the same patterns of oppression, of being oppressed, that Indigenous people also face. So what I would say to this question is that we have been trying to, or people have been trying to answer this in one layer. The first stage of the process for us to be able to sit with the complexity of it is acknowledge the many layers and expand our capacity to sit with what's difficult about it. But not forgetting that in one of these layers, there is a planet that we were all born into. And very easily, this is very easy to weaponize and say, okay, so we're all indigenous. No, not in the sense that we're talking about in politics. Otherwise, you just flatten and delegitimize indigenous struggles. But there is a planet, there's a metabolic sense that we come into a complicated context, but metabolically we're part of the one thing. So at the same time that when I look at the land, there are all the layers of violence imposed on the land, there's a materiality to the land, and the entanglement we have with it and the movement of it, because there's no separability, it cannot be taken away from me. It doesn't depend on a narrative to exist. So trying to connect beyond the narratives about belonging or not belonging is important, while we address the paradoxes and complexities of these narratives and the kinds of politics that are possible within and with/out modernity too. So it's not a simple answer, but it's an answer that invites us to sit with what's difficult and with the shit that has been left uncomposted and saturated on top of the planet, but that doesn't negate our intrinsic entanglement with the planet itself. So different layers. The next one is, how does one deal with the danger of appropriation when learning from other stories, and how relevant is it for the stories to originate in one's own communities? Yeah, this is a very pertinent question in the current moment, I think, too. So appropriation, the the root of the word appropriation is related to property. So if we turn the stories into property, and that happens because of capitalism and modernity, then we have a problem here in terms of consuming stories and trading stories in that context, right? So that is one layer of the conversation that cannot be ignored. And so for us to understand how to do it differently, we have to understand the problem in more depth. Otherwise, it doesn't work, right? Otherwise, it's just a simplistic solution. So part of the problem of the whole discussion about appropriation in this context is that when it emerged, it was to protect indigenous stories from being consumed and extracted and then mobilized for money in different contexts, not just stories, but objects and not just cultural artifacts, but sometimes even physical bodies have been traded in museums with that. So we have to acknowledge that history. But then what you see is that the whole discussion of appropriation is also appropriated in other movements. So one of the things that we saw in the collective in a residency we had in the summer in Europe was when the indigenous people brought lots of arts and crafts for sale. Other people were looking at them and saying, I can't buy it, otherwise I will be accused of appropriation, right? And there was such an irony in that, because the whole discussion of appropriation emerged in the context of other people creating these objects and selling it to other people. So it emerged to protect the communities who live off these objects, right, of the selling of this arts and crafts and handcrafts. But in that context, what emerged to protect it was being weaponized in a very cruel way to destroy their livelihoods, right? So being present to these paradoxes is extremely important, and understanding how they work before we can say, okay, how do we do it? How do we move it in a different way? So, but as I think, to make the long answer shorter, I think it's everything is related to relationships. So relationship building based on trust, consent, reciprocity, respect, and accountability is at the bottom of everything. If you have a relationship with somebody who has a story, it's that relationship that is going to determine what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. If the story is out there in the public, then it depends. It depends on your relationship to the people where the story originated. It depends on how you're going to use the story. Another day, there was somebody who asked about the story of the Wetiko or the Wendigo in this forum. And what I've been told about the story from Anishinaabe elders is that I know the story, but I'm not authorized to talk about them, because the story itself produces effects that are material in nature. That's part of what I've been told. So the stories can only be told in certain circumstances, because and especially in the winter they can be told, in the summer they can't, because they call forth something in reality that I may not be in a position to deal with, right? So some of the stories are alive in different ways, or they activate things that other stories don't activate. And we have to be attentive to that side of stories as well, and the responsibility and accountability we have to those stories. Do I think that there are ways of telling other culture stories that are ethical? Yes, I do think that, but I don't think there is a formula for saying this is the way that you're going to tell it that is ethical, because also they are going to be received and consumed in different ways. And there will always be people in the community saying, you shouldn't have done that, right? Mm-hmm. So that's it is a dance with the stories and with the places where they originated in. And the more you demonstrate that you have thought about the issues, and that you were humble in your approach to the stories, not showing that, oh, if the story is there, it's my entitlement to use it. It is in the movement of it that you will see the ethics in like manifesting, rather than saying I tick this boxes, therefore I can use it. It's my entitlement to use it, because in that case you are consuming it. So we're still learning how to do it. It's not easy. When I'm asked not to tell a story, I don't. Basically, I also am very, like I said in the part what I read today, some stories came up when I was writing chapter 8 that involved family members, and I had not talked to them about it, so it was not my story to tell, even though I was part of the story. And I could say, if I wanted, if my spinner was there, he would have said, okay, it's your story too, because you're involved. But if you're presenting something that puts somebody else in a position of vulnerability, then you need consent. And I knew that in order to get real consent in that case, it would require a different process. So I decided that that story was not mine to tell alone. It was a story to be told. And when I say not mine to tell alone, it's the authorization for some things to be public that I'm talking about. I'm not saying that we should have just one narrative of the story. We could as well have many different versions of the story for me and my parents, for example, or my brother or my children. But it would have to have a common understanding of what's going to be made public. That's what I'm talking about, not about a unified idea. But we could, in the future, have a session with other people, with especially Indigenous people, to talk about the ethics of sharing stories. I think that is a great idea. Thank you for the question. Could you speak about the essence of discernment? And yes, and I think in the next session, I think we're going to be talking more about that too. For me, discernment is about being present to what's presenting itself with attention and intention too. Because you're looking at, again, the different layers of things, how they are moving, where they're moving towards, how they intersect with each other, how modernity is manifesting in them in generative or harmful ways, generally more harmful than generative, and how your intervention or your offering can be done in a good way, in the sense of how do I steer what's happening here in front of me, what's presenting itself, in a direction that reduces or interrupts harm. So you have to be, again, back to, are you the right messenger? Do you have the right message? Are you in the right mood to do it? What's the right mood to do it? Is it the right moment? Is it the right moon? All of these things need to be part of your decision-making process, and at the basis of it is, do I have here, am I enacting relationships based on trust, respect, reciprocity, consent, and accountability? So in the next session, we're going to be talking more about I think, but unless something else comes up, decolonial understandings of sobriety, maturity, discernment, and accountability, and what kinds of things can hack Boxhead and the modern imprints, relational, cognitive, and affective imprints that we have inherited. So I think I would say, please come back. Come back next time as well. Thank you for the question. So Mary Stewart, you write of the spirits who know and guide us, who contact us and help us see the gifts we carry. How can we speak of, invoke this in how can I invoke this contact in secular contexts? So for me, the idea of spirits and okay, so let's start with this. Reality itself, what's out there and what's interpolating and communicating with us, they are narrativizable. Narratives cannot contain it. What we have when we talk about spirits, for example, is a useful fiction. We call it spirits and we invent these things, but we invent in order to relate, in order to connect. There are other words that we use to talk about these interpolations, which are, for example, exiled capacities, having the body reason with us, right? I don't know what form these things take for different people. And maybe these forms that they take are just our unconscious creating the symbols, right? So that it becomes intelligible to us. There was actually a book, there's a book by Mel Madrona about narrative therapy that has a very interesting quote that has stuck with me. And Kesha Hennick was also the person who kept repeating it for me as I was being trained in disciplines of vision, basically. So the quote says that when the visions that you see in experiences of sensory deprivation or even psychedelic experiences, they are the masks that your ancestors are using to communicate with you. And remember, ancestors are not just human. And they're not just those who have come before, it's those who are yet to come. And time is not linear in that realm anyway. So, and they are using the symbols that you know to try to communicate, but this is always an imperfect communication. In this thing. So you have to be suspicious of your interpretations. Otherwise, and also suspicious of what your ego wants to see in this interpretation. So you see something and then that's it. That's I'm being told by whoever is out there what I want to hear. and then off you go and act on that, right? So there's a discipline of engaging with visions and intuitions. It's not simple. And this discipline involves the intellect. It does not just trash it, right? So it's not about either the intellect or the intuition. It's both together and with suspicion of both, right? So the more work you do with your spinners, with your buzz, with your ego, the better you are at actually being generatively suspicious and being able to act quicker with these things. So the more familiar you are with your shadow, the better you are at creating useful fictions or useful fictional interpretations that help you actually move in a direction that is more accountable and has more responsibility. Otherwise, the desires of your ego are going to be driving what you want to see in these interactions. But if you call them spirits, and that's what most of the communities we work with, they call them encantados, actually. And that takes me to the Encanto cartoon that is very popular right now. But for many of the communities we work with, encantados are not just spirits as in ghosts, but encantados, it's the tree that can talk to you, or the animals that come with a message, or a dream that you receive. So it's not just physical things. They operate in a very different way. Once I was told it was in a holographic way. They operate in holographic ways in communicating, but we have to be extremely suspicious about our own imagination and desires and ego creating this or taking the masks that the ancestors are wearing to communicate and making it something that is convenient and for us. So it all comes with discipline and discernment and a relational orientation that is based on responsibility and accountability, and that doesn't turn your back to the shit and the difficult things. Yeah, so that's that. Appropriation, where am I now? You write of the spirits? No, that's the one that I saw. Molly. Molly. Hello, Molly. How do we best deal with the grief that arises within this time, or just being human who is becoming aware of the horrors of modernity? Yeah. Great question. It's So within modernity, we're taught to avoid pain, and we are also taught that happiness is a series of better and better pleasures rather than the overcoming of struggle. And that that has a huge impact. And I'm using that as explained in a very good interview with Zygmund Bauman that was, I think, one of his last interviews with Al Jazeera in 2016, I think, or 17. And I do recommend the interview. I think in terms of elders within modernity, he actually chose that path, the path of eldership and of mapping the ditches of modernity, right? So I will include the link to the interview on in the email that I sent on Saturday. But the first part about learning to be present to the grief is to expand our capacity to hold space for its difficult, painful without being overwhelmed, irritated, or immobilized. So this has been the first learning I think that we had in the collective, that without that bit, without having expanding collective capacity to do that, we will try to escape it. And sometimes we try to escape grief by talking about grief, or we try to escape grief by trying to move it in artificial ways quickly, or it always becomes a circular dance with what we do with it. But being present to it and allowing it to move slowly as we collectivize our hearts so that it can be present in a way that doesn't overwhelm us is part of the, I think, of the ways that we can deal with it. For communities in high intensity struggle, dealing with grief is actually a daily practice. So there's no not much appeal or opportunities for escaping the grief, and when it is integrated into the routine together with, like, it's grief and joy and pain and then relief, but it's accepted as an integral part of life. It's very different from believing or being attached to the promise of a life without grief, without loss, without pain, right? And that attachment itself is one of our probably most impactful challenges, something that we have to figure, because it's not serving us it never served us actually, but right now, as we see shit hitting the fan, we have three options. We either have the option of escapism into whatever feels better, and that will be an idealization or romanticization of something that will help us to reduce the complexity and focus on something that is controllable and that gives us a sense of certainty. Or we have the hopelessness ditch, and then we say there's no point in doing anything. And by that point, we may say, I just may live my best life, because if we're going to die, we're going to die. And the only way for me to deal with it is just not accept it, but not pay attention to it. And these are two types of nihilism. One is active nihilism. The other one is passive nihilism. The third one, which is hard, is to stay with the shit and with the trouble, with the shadows, with the monsters, with the ditches, and learn that there's no formula that will get us through it. It is in the doing that we'll learn what works, what doesn't work, in what context. And that is exhausting, I have to say. And yet that's what's needed. So we need stamina, we need resilience, we need endurance. This is not going to be a sprint. It's going to be a marathon, and it's going to be a marathon every year, every day. So there are three options. And I think we're still learning how to sit with it. And we need to learn from people who have sat with it before. but at the same time, we can't expect them to deliver the answers as a book or a formula or one story or a blueprint. They can show direction, but they can't, like in your context, you will need to learn how to do it. We will need to learn how to do it on our own, because this is, some things are repeated and some things are unprecedented. So I think there's time for one more. Let me see. Molly, Eric, Mary, Ella. What does it, Paul? So I think that's the next one. What does it mean to grow down and then up and out of the mess together? So we've been talking about it, I think. The first thing is the skepticism that we have to have towards our designed desires, the desires that were enabled and are harnessed by modernity so that it keeps going uninterrupted. Then the idea of developing stamina to sit with everything, the good, the bad, the ugly, the broken, and the messed up, as Cash also puts in his text. And so then up and out of the mess together. There's also something in the thing, in that sentence that I picked up now, is the desire of the out of the mess, right? I don't think there is an out of the mess, really. I think there's maybe out of this mess into a different mess. But the desire for something to be not messy is problematic. So I think I have to have a look at my own writing and see where modernity was there back to the desire for an outside that's going to probably give us certainty, control, and security, rather than this nurturing of the sense that this is going to be long-term work and it doesn't stop. It's continuous, right? So thank you for spotting a spinner there. And yeah, when I do the second version of the book, I'll have to go back to that. But I would say, Paul, go to Cash's text. I think in that text, it's more elaborated what you're talking about in terms of growing down with the 35 things that Cash has listed. And it's 10 o'clock, so I have to finish the session. And but I will be here for another 15 minutes if you want. For those of you who want to stay a little bit more, since today we talked about questions related to mental health, I think it's important that we also make space for anything that you feel needs to be shared. And I thank you all for being here today. And I will see you next week in our last session. So thank you.
Nice stuff.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Many, many thanks.
Thank you.